today was a great day for two reasons. One is I got to have lunch with my wife, which makes any day a good day. And I got to use lots of languages. When we went to the restaurant, the person who met us at the front desk was obviously French. She had a beautiful Parisian French accent. And so, of course, I can't resist. I asked her, "Vous parlez français?" And she said, "Oui." I said, "Vous êtes française ou québécoise? Are you French or are you Quebecer?" And she said, "Je suis française de Paris." And so we had a great little conversation there in French, and I felt, fairly comfortable in French. Then a little later on, the gentleman who came to our table and brought us the menus and so on he looked Filipino, and he had a Filipino accent. And so, of course, I had to ask, "Pinoy ka ba? Are you Filipino?" And let me tell you off the bat that my knowledge of the Tagalog language is really limited, but it was lots of fun. So I asked him, "Are you Filipino?" And he said, "Opo, yes." And I said, "Nagsasalita ba ikaw ng Tagalog? Do you speak Tagalog?" And he said, "Opo." He was very surprised that I could say anything. And I said, "Magandang hapon, kumusta ka? Good afternoon, how are you doing?" And so we're having this nice little conversation, and it was so much fun. I find that very exhilarating, and this is what I do all the time. Later in the day, I spoke some Punjabi. I spoke my 10 words of Serbian, and I got to speak, what else? Just a bunch of languages throughout the day. But one of the things that my students often ask is, how do I start a conversation with native speakers, with people that I don't know? Because they know that I do this all the time. For some people, it feels a little bit embarrassing, but I mean, this is a part of what gets me going. For me, the reward of speaking other languages is all about talking with real people. I am only marginally fascinated by perfective and imperfective verbs or third conjugation verb endings and stuff. I love communicating with people, and I love making new friends. And languages have made for me friends from around the world, some of whom have been friends for life. And these little conversations are very important to me. So my students ask me, how do you start a conversation with people in the language that you're learning? Well, I have certain standard lines that I do, but this is my suggestion. First of all, just ask. If you hear people speaking a different language, you can say something like, "I'm a language student. I'm very interested in languages. Can you tell me what language you're speaking?" Maybe you know, and maybe you're not entirely sure. It might even be your target language, but sometimes you can't hear that clearly and you're not sure. Are they speaking Spanish or Italian, and you're not sure? Just go ahead and ask. People don't mind telling you, and if they don't seem like they're comfortable with it, just back off and everything's fine. But just ask them, "May I ask what language you're speaking?" And say, "Wow, it sounds wonderful." Another thing that's really helpful is I often start with a compliment, and I say, "Well, you speak English, obviously. You speak English well. How did you learn English? That's amazing. I would love to be able to speak your language like you speak English. That would be so cool." And people appreciate being acknowledged for the work that they've done to learn your language. So that always puts things into a good frame. You can ask them, how did you learn English? This is what I asked the French lady at the restaurant today. How did you learn your English? Was it hard for you? Did you grow up with English? And she explained that she's here in Canada to improve her English. So that's a great way to start the conversation and to be able to use your language. I think it's also a good idea many times to ask permission to speak in the other person's native language. Sometimes, I realized one time when I was in a Mexican restaurant and I was speaking Spanish with the servers, I kind of sensed that something wasn't going so well, that there was a little bit of tension of some kind, and I couldn't figure this out. And then it dawned on me. I realized that because I was speaking Spanish, they thought that I was implying that their English was so bad that we couldn't get the job done unless I talked to them in Spanish. So then I realized they wanted to know that I realized that they could speak English well. So I backed up and I said, "Wow, su inglés es buenísimo. Puedo practicar mi español, necesito la práctica, está bien, and is it cool if I speak Spanish with you?" I need the practice, and that sort of thing. Everything changed with that as soon as you ask permission. So that's a good idea. Don't just walk into the Mexican restaurant or something and start speaking your Spanish, especially if it's limited. Don't try to be funny. Don't say goofy things like "hasta la vista, baby." That just is embarrassing. It just sounds silly. But ask permission. Show respect. Remember that you're often in somebody else's world, and you're there as a guest. So be respectful. Ask permission, and generally speaking, when you do that, people don't mind at all. If you say something like, "Do you mind if I try out my Chinese on you? Is that all right with you?" "Oh, sure, yeah, go for it." Some people are very encouraging, and if they're not, again, you can back off and just let it go. You can also let the other people choose which language they want to talk with you in. They might not want to talk to you in the language that you're studying, and just let them speak English if they'd rather do that. You'll have lots of opportunity to use your target language, but again, show respect, be considerate, and be thoughtful about how the other people might feel. Another thing that's really important is to remember that just because a person speaks your target language, that does not necessarily mean that they want to or are able to teach you their language. When you think about it, remember, not everybody who speaks English is capable of teaching it. And it's the same in every language that you might be interested in learning. So don't force people to become your teachers. Sometimes you're not even doing yourself a favor, because even though they speak their language perfectly, they don't know how to explain their language to a foreigner. That's a special skill. People who are bilingual are not all teachers. And just because you speak English, you may not be an English teacher. Being a language user and being a language speaker are different skill sets. And you have to keep that in mind when you're drawing on people around you to help you with your target language. I like to distinguish between teachers and coaches. I have people who are my language coaches, and they allow me to speak whatever language I'm working on with them, but I don't expect them to explain how their language works or to give me grammatical training or any of that sort of thing. It's just conversation partners, and you need to allow people to be conversation partners without taking them hostage and walking up to a stranger and say, "How do you say this?" or ask them something like "Tell me how past tense verbs work in your language." They might not have a clue. You speak English probably if you're understanding this video, and if somebody walked up to you and said, "Please explain to me phrasal verbs," English speakers, most of us, don't know what phrasal verbs are. It's a tricky thing for people who are learning English. But just because we speak English doesn't mean that we can explain phrasal verbs to foreign people. So don't expect that of people who speak your target language either. Finally, when you finish your conversation with somebody who speaks the language that you're trying to learn, remember to say thank you. Thank them for giving you the opportunity to practice and to hear the language, and let them know that it was a pleasure for you, that you really enjoyed meeting them, that you're not just using them like some kind of tool to get the job done, but that you're enjoying them as people. In fact, if you don't enjoy the people, I doubt that you're really going to get very far in the language. And I don't think you'll have the motivation, and I think you should probably just quit. You've got to enjoy the people. And if you'll do that, you can go a long ways in the language, and you can really benefit from your contact with even complete strangers. So have a go. Be brave. Take a chance. Be friendly. Be courteous. Be respectful. And be grateful for the help that you get. Talk to you again soon.